Hey everybody, welcome to the episode of the LitRPG Podcast. I am Ramon Mejia here. I'm here to bring you the latest LitRPG news, reviews, and of course author interviews. This is episode number 86 of the podcast. And this week I have 8 new LitRPG reviews just for you. As a quick mention though, we recently had a nice LitRPG community member that appreciated the work we do on the show here and made a nice, very nice donation to help support the cost of running the podcast, hosting fees, website stuff, all the good stuff. So I just want to thank that person. They do wish to remain anonymous. So thank you very much. The only thing that they asked was that I wear a fun holiday themed hat for the rest of the month. So I'll be wearing this particular thing. I'm not really on the holidays that much, but hey, you know, request to request, so like I can show appreciation for good support. So there you go. I think this thing's supposed to light up at some point, but it's daytime, so that doesn't quite work as a function. Maybe not that low. There we go. You can see my eyebrows now. So I'll be wearing this today, and of course the rest of the month on the podcast. So there you go. Get a nice good look at it. Okay, but again, thank you to all the other supporters who help make this show possible. Of course, people who support us on Patreon, the folks who click on the links we have at the show notes, and you know, we get a little bit of affiliate link money, like 5% of a purchase on Amazon. That all those little pennies help support the podcast. And of course, everybody just watches and shares the links to the show, helps bring new audience members to the LitRPG community, and helps support all the authors. Thank you everyone for your support as well, though. Okay, we're going to move on to see the LitRPG novels that we'll be reviewing this week. Include Halcyon Rising, Breaking Ground. Then after that, it'll be Keeper's World, The Case of the Mad Monk. Then after that, it'll be City of Champions Online, issue number 2, Rising Up. And then it is going to be The Starry Skies of Darkaan, Realm of Arkon, book 6. Then it is going to be Empire Burning, Emerilia, book 11, which is the last in that series. It's rather sad to see it finally finish up. Then after that, it'll be Desert Storm, Puatera Online, book 3. And then it'll actually be a couple of, these are some stories that I've had on the back catalog for a while. I promised the authors that if I had any extra time in a podcast at some point, I would review their stuff. And so this is what they are. We have The Hope Engine, which is a railroad story. And I don't normally review railroad stories, but I'll get into that later. And last but not least, this is also another one I promised the author I'd review at some point if I had time. Fountellion, In the Spiral, The Nature of the Game and Progression. On the Amazon tag, it says GameLit, but on the cover, it actually does say LitRPG. And the author has assured me several times it is LitRPG. So there you go. 8 stories that I'll be reviewing for you. But of course, we begin with the show with LitRPG news. And in LitRPG news, we're going to begin with the story of Daniel Schienehofen, who announced this week that he's found a narrator for the latest novel, well, for his latest novel rather, Apocalypse Gate. He's decided to use the voice talents of Andrea Parsonu. She has 6 narration credits to her name on Audible, including Dominion of Blades. So she's already done some work within the LitRPG community, and I'm sure she's looking to do quite a bit more. Remember that there are 2 versions of this novel, which is the author's cut, which has totally graphic sex scenes, and then there's the PG-16 version, which has those sex scenes cut out. So I'm kind of curious to see if the author is actually going to do 2 different versions of the novel or just stick to one. So we'll find out together how that goes. Also in LitRPG news, we have William B. Rand. And if you've read Superstills and Superheroes, you know it's a good book. Book 2 was enjoyable as well. However, there's going to be a change with the audiobook edition for this one. The author has decided to give the rights to book 2 and 3 to Podium. So they've apparently are waiting for Nick Podell to do the narration. So Jeff Hayes won't be returning to the series as the narrator, unfortunately. So sorry, Jeff does really good work though, so check out his stuff. Also in LitRPG news, we have Vasily Mahenko. He's recently read a couple articles regarding how to write a LitRPG story, giving some just general advice. The most recent article titled Game Mechanics, Part 1, Getting Started. It's a nice little article about the importance of creating your game world and defining what can and cannot be done. He also mentions that in the LitRPG genre, you have to understand that, like, unlike normal fantasy, where you can kind of do whatever you want to and there's magic bending rules, if something happens within a LitRPG story that breaks the rules you've established, or just in general breaks game logic, then the fans will absolutely notice, which is totally true. That's something that happens on a fairly regular basis. Someone from a different genre, like sci-fi or fantasy, usually fantasy, they kind of try to treat the LitRPG as just a fantasy story with some game stuff, and they're more than willing to like just ignore the rules they established, and that totally is noticeable to the people who really enjoy the kind of concreteness of this is a game world with like code, so it's harder to bend those rules, kind of thing. So it's a good article. Go read it. I would link in the show notes for you. The author has published it on the LitRPG Books Facebook page. Okay. Also in LitRPG news, we have Robert Bevan, one of my favorite humor LitRPG authors. He's created a very funny and entertaining holiday poem story called Caverns and Creatures, Night Before Christmas. It was originally published in 2015, but he's recently shown off an animated music video version of this, which I will be playing for you right now.
Caverns and Creatures, Night Before Christmas by Robert Bevan.
I'll skip ahead a little bit.
'Twas the night before Christmas, and all through the tavern, folks gathered for a tale of creature and cavern. Elves with their mead and dwarves with stone piss were assured of a story they'd not want to miss. The bard tuned his fiddle, cleared the phlegm from his throat, and prepared to recite the words that he wrote. But something was wrong. My senses did tingle at a sound from above. Were those hooves on my shingles? His show interrupted, the bard pouted grimly as someone or thing climbed out of the chimney. Some nerve had this lacking in judgment intruder. I leveled my crossbow at the fireplace to shoot her. But it wasn't a her, as I'd wrongly suspected, but a fat little dwarf. He was fully erected. The patrons all angrily put down their tankards and held up their weapons at this fat bearded wanker.
And of course, it goes on from there. So I highly encourage you to go watch that video. There's also a version of that, and just the poem version on Robert Bevan's webpage as well. We'll link in the show notes for both those for you to go check out. But it's a very funny, entertaining poem. It's like several minutes long. Also, in other critical failures news, there's apparently a mobile game based on the Caverns and Creatures world called Cooper Pooper. It's being offered as a reward for supporting the Critical Failures TV show Indiegogo campaign. It is apparently also going to be released on Android and iOS. So if you want to go support a TV version of Caverns and Creatures and Critical Failures, go support that Indiegogo and you can get a nice little video game app as well. So there you go. Okay, last bit of LitRPG news. Personally, I just want to thank everybody who's read Project Alpha, which is the latest book that I put out. Not too far from in the past, last week. It's been a really great launch week for me. The buys and the read-through rates have been very steady, and while I've gotten a few critical notes from readers, for the most part, all the reviews have been very positive. So thank you everyone that read the novel and left a review. It really does help and means a lot. Just to give you an example, like the first couple launch days were a little rough because of other things were happening in the literature world, and also people were reading other things. Like Emerilia 11 had come out, and Supercell and Superheroes came out too, and those are really big books, like lengthwise. So not everybody was reading it at that point. And our launch first couple of days, like we're on the Amazon bestsellers rank. We were in the thousands. So I'm like, oh, okay, that's pretty good. But then as we started getting more reviews, We dropped into like the 700s. And then now that we're at 36 reviews, we're in the 200s. So like, that's really good. Like we just dropped, I think I checked a little while ago, like a little bit under the 200s, like 192 or something. And that's really, really quite nice, actually. I'm hoping to get like the top 100 at some point. So folks, if you haven't read it yet, go pick it up. It's on Kindle Unlimited. And if you have read it, leave a review. Again, all those little reviews, even though they only take a few minutes, just some stars and a few words, and that's it. You know, you liked it, you didn't. But they really, really help. Like I said, between like no reviews and 36 reviews, ranking of like 1,000 to like in the 200. So like that's a huge thing for an indie author to get exposure on Amazon. That gets the book in front of other people on the Amazon algorithms, I guess. So thank you everyone for who's been supportive, and for the folks who are going to pick it up at some point, hopefully. Cross my fingers. Okay, on to some of the stories. There are only actually 2 other stories that are out now that I haven't read. The first one is going to be J.A. Cipriano's and J.B. Gardner's The Elements of Wrath Online, Book 3, Crystalfire Keep. That's out currently. Also out now is the third and last book in the Last War of Unigaea series. I'm probably saying it wrong. Jeff Hayes told me how to say it right, but I forgot. It is The Red Plague. That is out currently. If you're a fan of that series, go check out either one of those out. But that's kind of it. It's kind of a really light release week. So much so that I had extra time to go to the back catalog and say, oh, I'll check these out now. There are no new LitRPG audiobooks out this week. I know there's some on pre-order, which you can go check out. I know the one for Project Alpha is currently in production, and we're finishing it up, and we'll hopefully have it on Amazon fairly soon as well. Now, for upcoming LitRPG, again, there's not a ton of stories, but these are all the ones that I know about that are coming up, and there are some new additions to this particular list, including Teenage Kings, a Western LitRPG novella by Casper Vega. That should be out December the 18th. On the 21st of December, The Depths of Camelin, Camelin Realm Book 2. Also new to the list is One Life by Luke Green. It is supposed to be out December the 22nd. On the 26th of December, right after Christmas, it'll be Camelot Defiant, an Arthurian LitRPG, which is the 4th book in that series. At some point this month, The Dragon's Burden, Slander New Chronicles Book 4 is supposed to be out. The author originally told me it was supposed to be out at the beginning of December, but it's mid-December now, so who knows? I hope it comes out. It's a nice series. The Land is supposed to come out at some point as well. I'm saying December because I wanted to come out in December, but there was no official release date, so it might go into January. I don't know at this point. But these are some things that are officially in 2018. Press start on January the 5th. It doesn't have a pre-order, but the author has told me that's when she plans to release it. On the 7th of January, it'll be Sigil Online Hellions from Jeff Sproul. This is the actual cover art that the author plans to use. It's super cool. I mean, like there's an awesome sci-fi cyberpunk demon twister that looks really awesome to me, at least. So looking forward to checking that one out when it comes out on January the 7th. On the 17th of January, it'll be A Trap for the Potentate, which is the Dark Herbalist Book 3. And last but not least, January 24th, it'll be the 3rd book in the Nero series, The Reapers. So there you go. Those are the shows that, the novels that are scheduled to come out. So there you go. Okay, on to new releases and reviews. And in new releases and reviews, we're going to begin with the novel The Halcyon Rising: Breaking Ground by Stone Thomas. Okay, this one is 233 pages, $2.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. I will read you the author's description. My skill set brings all the girls to the yard. And by yard, I mean the temple of a young goddess who's using me to build a fortified city around herself before the god of war can finish slaying every deity in the heavens. He'd better not find us before we're ready. Spoiler, we are far from ready. But hey, I get a cool skill out of it. The goddess allows me to view anyone's strength, vivacity, and other attributes as long as there were numbers on a menu, and then use their life experience to make them stronger. I can unlock their special skills too, and it's all stuff no one else can see. Hence the girls, a beastkin builder, a necrotrix made of slime, a half-elf gypsy that charms snakes, and more. So there you go. That's the author's description of the novel. This is basically a fantasy harem lit RPG novel where the main character has upgrade powers. So this is there are other lit RPG novels that are kind of like this. Super Self for Superheroes and the Legendary Builder series have the same fundamental concepts in there, but each one of these stories executed differently. So again, the main character can see his and other characters' character sheets and upgrade their stats using their accumulated experience points. And the RPG stuff in this novel is interesting. But I've read other novels that do it better. Still, it's not a bad story. The story itself, though, is it's not as entertaining, unfortunately. Like the game stuff, the RPG stuff is really well done. Research. You can tell the author put some effort into thinking of skill trees and how they would develop, which is really good. That's kind of a fundamental part of LitRPG. The combat scenes they're decent. They're not like super amazing, but they're not bad by any means. There are some town building aspects of the story, but they show up at the end of the novel. So a lot of the beginning of the story is just a lot of attempted world building that's not done amazingly well. Backstory for characters and just the main character kind of wandering around and collecting ladies to save, basically. So there you go. Overall, it's an okay story, but the RPG mechanics are good. However, there are better little RPG stories where a main character with upgrade powers, like I said, Super Sales and Superheroes, books 1 and 2 are good. They're really good. Book 1 of the Legendary Builder series is also a good example of this kind of a particular game mechanic and harem-ish kind of story. And this one just isn't quite as good as either one of those, but it's not bad by any means. It's just not good. So it gets a score for me of 6 out of 10 for Halcyon Rising Breaking Ground. 6 out of 10. Okay. Next story is going to be Keeper's World, The Case of the Mad Monk. And again, this is the case where the author, I think, plans to use the same cover art for all the little short stories in the series. Okay. This one is a short story, like a really short, 60 pages, but it's also 99 cents. It is also available on Kindle Unlimited, written by Justin Miller. I'll read you the author's description. Most people can live a peaceful life, not in fear of the monsters of the outside world. Most people don't have to worry about what goes bump in the night. For others, there are the watchmen, the police of the ancient age who wander the streets at night. And when the watchmen are not enough, there are the hunters, those who pursue the greatest of villains across any border. Join Hunter Thiel as he hunts down the greatest killer known, the Mad Monk. The Case of the Mad Monk is the second short story in the Keeper's World series based within the world of the World Keepers books. There will be information and references within the short stories that will not be entirely understood without reading the associated book. And this is true to a degree. This is me now. That was the author description. This is me again. This story is set in the World Keeper universe. Again, that I always feel like that is a very underrated series. It has great real-time strategy and like world building and like God game kind of stuff going on in the main World Keeper series. Very entertaining if you're into those kind of games. This is not that. This is essentially a short story about hunting down or tracking down a murderer who's doing these weird experiments, but it pulls all the magic and RPG mechanics from those other series, from the World Keeper series. If you've never read the World Keeper series, you can totally read this. But it's going to feel more like a fantasy story because all the game mechanics are not explained. Again, short story, 60 pages. You don't have time to do it. So the author does assume, if you're coming from the LitRPG side of this, that you've read those other stories. And if you have, you're going to get all the little tiny game mechanic references. There are still references to levels and skills and ki and mana and all that good stuff and health bars in the story. So even without having read those, you can probably have a vague sense of the RPG mechanics, but again, those things aren't explained. It does focus on just the hunt for this murderer, and there's a little bit of like backstory world building here, but it feels very much like a procedural story, like Law and Order or CSI, where they're hunting down the murderer, and it's a really enjoyable short story. I had a really good time reading it. Again, not that long, so it doesn't take too long to get through, but it's enjoyable for me. I give it a score of, I forgot to write it down, but a 7 out of 10. So there you go. Score of 7 out of 10 for Keeper's World, The Case of the Mad Monk. Very enjoyable. Okay, on to the next story, which is City of Champions Online, issue number 2, Rising Up. This one is again another short story at 125 pages, 99 cents. It is not available on Kindle Unlimited, but again, for less than $1, it's decently priced. Okay, this is the author's description. It is a dark time for the city of Atlanta. In the world of City of Champions Online, a group of white supremacists have taken over the city of Atlanta and are holding the city hostage as they attempt to usurp control of the government. Southern Pride, the local team of heroes, have proven to be plants by the villains, using their positions to try and give the takeover a look of legitimacy. Those who would stand against them have been declared villains and are being hunted down. But not everyone has given up on Atlanta. Vampira and the Misfits helped heroes and civilians to escape the city during the initial chaos. Now they're taking the fight to Southern Pride and rallying anyone they can to their side, because the Battle of Atlanta is just getting started. So there you go. Actually, nice description, very accurate. If you liked book 1 in the series, you're going to like book 2. The superheroes fighting in a VR MMO. That's kind of the gist of the world building game mechanics up there. The bad guys are still racist Nazi types, but they're starting to fight more intelligently, so things are going to be harder for the main character and her group. The team of rogue heroines has a plan to win, but like any good story, nothing ever goes to plan. Overall, this is an enjoyable read. It's a bit lighter on the RPG stuff than the other author's other works. He has several LitRPG series, and this always felt to me to be the lightest on the RPG stuff, which is fine. There are a bunch of detailed character sheets and power descriptions at the very end of the novel, so if you're into like all those details, he does give it to you. It's just not in the story directly. It's at the end. It's like the last 15% of this novel. All that 15% is character sheets, ability descriptions with like numbers and powers associated, so all that good stuff. To me, it's a good story. It went places I didn't think I was going to go going into this, which is always nice. But again, it basically is a superhero RPG story. So there you go. For me, it gets a score of 7 out of 10 for City of Champions Online, issue number 2, Rising Up. So there you go. Okay, on to our next story, The Starry Skies of Darkaan, Realm of Arkon, Book 6, written by G. Aquila. Okay, this one is 239 pages, $5.99. It is, again, not available on Kindle Unlimited. This one's a little more expensive. So if you're not really into this series, this would not be the place to try to jump on the wagon. You're not going to understand anything. But I'll read you the author's description. The spectral sea of Cathila is shrouded in strange magic of a powerful artifact. Creon must face the great dragon of Pangea, an impossible quest on the ancient paths transformed by the twice-cursed god, a journey through an endless graveyard, the smiles of the goddess of stealth, and rage, infinite rage. The path to the higher plane never seems to end. Too much for any man to overcome, but not for an elder demon, and so he soldiers on after the Black Crow and toward the Red Moon hanging over the valleys of Karn. And a lot of that stuff is not going to be understandable to anybody else who hasn't read the series, even this novel. Like if you haven't read the novel, a lot of it's like, that doesn't make sense. This is a really short review because again, we're into book 6 of the series. So if you're not a fan right now, you've already skipped out. And if you are a fan, you probably already picked it up. But again, the story begins with the story of perspective of Max, which is a different character that has showed previously. Actually got his own novel in the series, but most of it is from the perspective of Creon. So don't worry if you started reading this and it's like it's Max's story. It's like it's just for a little while, like the first 10%ish, and then it goes back to Creon, and the rest of the story is basically him. Essentially, this is a multi-phase dungeon story dive. With the ultimate purpose of finally reuniting Creon and his sister and his best friend Max in this game world. The action and adventure that you've come to expect with the story is all here. Great quest, very interesting stuff, good power-ups, good new abilities, some interpersonal relationship things going on as well. And basically this is just for the fans of the series. Like if you're into this series, this is a good read. If you're not, for almost $6 essentially for 239 pages, it's too expensive otherwise. But for me, I enjoyed it. I've been keeping up with the series, so I've enjoyed each additional novel, and I was finally happy to see the resolution I was expecting in the story, so wasn't disappointed. It gets a score of 7 out of 10 for me for the Starry Skies of Darkaan, Realm of Arkon Book 6. Again, a score of 7 out of 10. Okay. On to Emerilia Book 11, Empire Burning, written by Michael Chatfield. Okay, this one is 302 pages for $4.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Okay, Pandora's box has been opened. The Pantheon of Emerilia has gone through the tremendous change of the events of myth and legends suppressed. Warships now move in the stars, made of soul gem constructs built by mages and engineers, crewed by those that lived on Emerilia or within Earth's simulation. The Darkaan system stands with Emerilia, their brothers and sisters, their family, and fellow human descendants. The Ducal Empire will not let Emerilia rise peacefully. As empires grow, so too can they be toppled. Only one can remain. In their biggest gamble yet, they must pass through the fires of war, empire against empire. Okay, so that's the author's description. This is it, folks. This is the end of the series. It's an action-filled send-off to where the Terran Alliance scores off against the Ducal Empire. That's basically what this is. There are space battles galore and more. Unfortunately, and this is really sad for me to see and to say, what the story doesn't have is a lot of RPG mechanics, like almost none. But it's not unexpected, honestly. Like, if you've been keeping up with the series, as the series has progressed, you'd notice more and more that the RPG mechanics have kind of dropped out or be minimized, or like they're just simply less. And that's cool. Like, when the RPG mechanics are already established, you don't need to reestablish them every time, but you do need to do upkeep, keep showing that there's character progression and levels and skills gain and all that good stuff. If that's what you establish as the game mechanics story. And this just doesn't have that. Like, there are literally 5 places in the entire story where there's any kind of game mechanic reference. And that makes sense because this story has stopped being, in this last novel, about Emerilia, which is the game world. They're going out into space, and the majority of the story takes place either in space or fighting on other worlds that are not the Emerilia game world. So it totally makes sense as far as the story goes that departure. But that also means that this isn't LitRPG. Like, there are 5 places at like the 6.87% mark, 53% mark, 78% mark, 9% mark, and 98% mark. And that's it. And a couple of those are just character sheets for Dave. The rest of them are like just quest notifications or like title notifications. And that's it. And that's just not enough for this to be LitRPG, unfortunately. It doesn't mean it's not an enjoyable story. Again, the action is good. I was less entertained by the space stuff than it was by the ground battles, but that's just because the ground battles have the characters that I love. The space stuff was fine, but it's also for other characters and things that I don't have a lot of emotional investment in. So that's just me personally, but still very entertaining read, and it was a really nice send off for the story. But again, it's just not LitRPG, so it is unfortunate. There are some, like, the series ties up. There are no like real loose ends either here. The end of it is just its resolutions, and there's like what happens with the characters later. And some people might get a little sniffly at the end. Nothing sad, but it's like, oh, my friends are going away kind of stuff. As a space opera, this would get like a 7 out of 10. It's enjoyable. But as LitRPG, and this kind of is sad for me because I like Michael Chatfield, good guy, we're buddies. As I like to think we are. We hang at Darkaan and we chat sometimes. But as LitRPG, it gets a score of 4 out of 10, and it genuinely makes me sad to give it that score because it just isn't. It's not LitRPG, and I can't be unfair in how I score things because I know I've given other novels a score of 4 out of 10 because they didn't have RPG mechanics in there, like they said the LitRPG name kind of implies. And so I have to be fair in how I review these novels, even as for a guy who's a buddy, and for a series that I really do enjoy and I like. So again, as a sci-fi space opera, 7 out of 10. Had a good time reading it, but just as LitRPG, sorry, gets a score of 4 out of 10 for Empire Burning Emerilia Book 11. So sorry, Michael. Okay, on to the next review. It is going to be Desert Storm, Puatera Online, Book 3. Okay, this one is written by Don Chapman. It is 124 pages, $1.99. It is also available on Kindle Unlimited, so yay. I'll read you the author's description. Forging a new quest, Maddie and Alex unite the desert runners in order to find enough food to feed the turmoil through their birthing. But there's a descent into chaos at the mayor's farm on the discovery of a stolen turmoil egg and the fact that he's hoarding zombie cattle. Maddie's choices are limited, but her fight isn't. That's almost a description of the last book. I think just bleeding a little bit into this one. So it's not a very good description of what actually happened to the story. So there. Full disclosure, the author has a link to this particular podcast at the back of her short story. So that's very nice of her. So thank you, Don. It's very nice of you. Unfortunately, it doesn't change the review at all. So I just wanted to close the audience so that is there. So, okay. Reading this short story, whenever I read some of Dawn's stuff, she's a really good writer. I always hope it's going to be better. Like, I have really good expectations because I know she's a good writer. And I went into this short story hoping for the best. And at the beginning of it, I was rather impressed. I was like, oh, because there's finally a character sheet for the main character. And we get to see information about her abilities and her stats. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is it. This is the book in this series that's going to get a 7 or 8 out of 10 because look, there's characters she's finding and there's a ton of game mechanic stuff and there's a promised war coming, and I fully expected to see like this big battle at the end of the story at least, and just this huge comment scene. I'm like, this is the one, this is the fulfillment of everything in the series, and I was super hopeful, and then I was disappointed, and I was like, oh man, it's just like, so the beginning part is good. Like maybe it raised my expectations too much because there's finally like a character sheet and like description of stats, and like the character has the ability to raise her stat points value or her character abilities. I was like, but from like the 28% mark to the 75% mark, it just feels like a bunch of stuff came out of left field again. And it almost feels like filler in a little bit. Like later on it shows like, okay, maybe there were some things that are going to show up later in other series maybe, or like these are just like teases for things that may happen later on like some other series that's connected to this one. But from like as a reader's perspective, it's like this middle section just feels like it doesn't matter, and there's a bunch of weird plot twists and things that are just not set up, and they're just like, oh, here you go. I'm not going to spoil them yet. I'm going to in a little bit, so I'll let you know when the spoilers are coming up. But even after the 70% mark, the story never delivered on that promised war that was such a big deal at the end of book 2 and the beginning of this book. And so there were expectations that were just not fulfilled for me. And I'll get specific details in a little bit, but suffice to say that the middle scene in the story, they're interesting. They're well written and everything. It's just that they didn't make sense. And, the novel gets scored like a 6 out of 10 for me because of it. And I'm going to get spoiler in a minute. So if you don't want to hear spoilers about the novel, you skip ahead of the next review. But I feel like I need to be specific because just to kind of show you where this is like, I'm not what I'm talking about. Okay. So I'm going to get spoilery in like 3, 2, 1. Okay. On to specifics on this. Okay, now the biggest issue I had of the story is the middle section, the 28 to 75% mark. In a lot of ways, it feels really unnecessary. Like you could skip this whole section and you wouldn't really lose anything. Additionally, again, there's a bunch of stuff that just doesn't make sense and seems to come out of nowhere. Stuff like a vampire that's cured of vampirism, portals to other dimensions, time travel, the main character suddenly being an alien. And the main character suddenly had like these matrix powers to see the code of the game. And like each one of these elements was just introduced in such a way that it was just, there was no setup to it. It really felt like this. It was like, poof, hey, look, I'm a rogue that discovered the portals in this game lead to past versions of Earth. Poof, hey, look, I'm a vampire. That is a portal under his castle. You want to go through and kill the guy you fell in love with in the last book? And poof, hey, main character, did you know you're an alien? And I'm like, I'm sort of exaggerating, but not like by a lot, to be honest. Like these characters were introduced and they're just like given names. They're like, hey, did you know this thing? And I was like, this was going so well. And it's not like these scenes aren't interesting. They're well written and they're very interesting if you're taking them by themselves. But in the context of the larger story in the series, like they don't make sense. Like there's nothing in this series that talks about vampires. There's nothing in this series that talks about time travel. There's a little foreshadowing like in book 2 about like portals to back to Earth, but nothing for time travel. And there's definitely nothing that's setting up like, oh, the main character has to kill the guy she loves in real life at all. I'm like, and then I'm like, where is this coming from? This is neat, but it doesn't make sense to the story. And that was kind of frustrating for me as a reader anyways. I think, like I said, the last part was just like the last 25%. I was expecting, okay, this is where that war's coming in. This is where like there's going to be a whole cool big battle that I was promised in book 2 and at the beginning of book 1. Because like, oh, a war is coming, and it's like there is no war. Like that entire thing is not fulfilled at the end of this novel, and it's just like instead the main character decides, I have to kill Dale. I have to kill the guy that was kind of the semi-villain in book 1 and 2. And that'll fix everything. And I'm like, that's not what she said was going to happen. Like, and like I said, there's even a weird twist with that thing that just like doesn't quite make sense either. And then at the end, the main character just jumps through the portal and they're poof, gone. That's it. The end. And like I said, my frustration is rather evident, and it's not a frustration with the story itself. Like, it's well written. Each scene is nice and it's interesting in its own way. It's just that the way it's set up and the way it flows, it didn't make sense to me, and I was just disappointed because there were also unfulfilled expectations. And again, this is also the most RPG novel. There are the most RPG mechanics I just in the novel, and I like that a lot. And I was just hoping, I wished that those RPG mechanics had been at the beginning, so we could appreciate them the entire story. I understand why the author did it in the story and the way it flows. It absolutely makes sense. It's just that these other things like stopped me from enjoying the novel as much as I had hoped. So again, the novel just gets a score of 6 out of 10, just because again, there's just these things that stopped it from being like good to me. And I'm like, I wished, like I said, these are the story choices of the author. I don't dispute her right to write the story, whatever she wants, just that they didn't work for me. And for other people, this may totally work. Like, you may enjoy all these different twists and weird things. Like, I'm cool with weird. It's just that they didn't come from anywhere that I expected them to. So it's like, okay, 7 to 6. Sorry. So Desert Storm, Puatera Online, book 3, gets a score 6 out of 10 from me. So there you go. Okay, on to the new guys. These are a couple stories, and I got to how to set this up a little bit. Basically, I ran out of things to read this week. Usually I'm reading between 8 and 10 novels on Amazon that are like new releases, and I just don't have time to read that other things. So sometimes when people have like rebranded their old stories as LitRPG, I don't read them because I'm like, I don't have time to go back and read something from 3 or 4 years ago or whatever. That's somebody decided to be LitRPG. Or stuff from Roller Road. I know I've reviewed stuff from Roller Road previously. It's just that I don't think it's fair generally, because the stuff from Roller Road is not finished. They're serialized stories generally, and they never gone through editing for the most part, and they're just not that finished product. So I don't think it's usually fair for me to like look at them and judge them in that state. However, that being said, I have there are 2 folks who asked me specifically to review their things. One's from the Roller Road. One is like an older story. It's not like super old, but it's something that you can tell wasn't originally written specifically as LitRPG. And both authors were like, hey, it's could you check out stuff? And I told them essentially the same thing. Like, if I have time, at some point in the future, I will review your things on the podcast. And I honestly expected that to never have time. So I was like, okay. So at this point, I'm basically fulfilling a promise to these folks because I have the time this week. Like, this is a slightly lighter release a month, or at least release a week. So we have 2 things that I'm going to review. The first is going to be, there we go. There's the cover art from the Royal Real story, The Hope Engine. So here we go. This is, it is currently 17 chapters long. The author publishes about a chapter a week. So it's a fairly good schedule, and it's written by Andrew Lynch. Okay. This is the author's description of the story. When a game has the power to bring peace to a planet, you're damn right everyone plays. Every person on the planet can choose if they want to live their life in the physical world or the digital, and Quentin has been waiting for his chance to go all digital. Once in the game, he chooses a powerful caster, but quickly finds just how fragile he is. His advisor is a little girl. The village he builds is filled with raving lunatics, and the only edible food for miles is poisonous to humans. But hey, his friends seem nice. High-level players are fleeing from their towns, beaten by a great force in the east. Will Quentin rise to the challenge and fight these evil forces? Will he pledge his alliance to them instead? Will he find a meal that doesn't make him sick? Find out in The Hope Engine. So there you go. That's the author's description. And again, the author is Andrew Lincoln. He actually he has a couple of novels under his belt as well. He's a writer already. He's published 2 on Amazon, one called Demi Heroes and the section called Sanctuary Fiends. But this is apparently his first attempt at writing a lit RPG novel. He's testing the waters again by writing initially on the Royal Road, which is a place where people can publish and get critiques and just give their stuff away for free, basically, on the internet. It's where a lot of LitRPG authors go to test their works to see like if they need to workshop it a little bit more, or just get critiques on particular things like game mechanics. And we do everything published there is for free, so it's always a nice place to get a free story. But there are some interesting things in the story that are nice, but there are also some issues with it. And like the biggest issue in the story is that it tries to be too many things at once, especially very early on in the novel. It's really not until like the 8th chapter in the novel that it feels like it starts to find its own voice. The setup for the story is basically that the world, through some like complicated means, a backstory, it's kind of gone to hell in a handbasket, and that this game saved everybody, and that everybody in the world plays this game. And it's just a setup. It doesn't really particularly matter. And that the main character is at 16 years old, finally has the decision to basically play this game full time with the pain settings turned on. And so a lot of the beginning part of this novel is explanation of game mechanics, description of the game, setup, or his backstory and things like that. But one of the things that happens in the story is that there's an introduction of so many things. I'm going to get back to that in a second. And again, but about chapter 8, that's when it starts to feel like it's actually getting good and interesting, and the authors kind of found what works for the story. There, the main character explores how to build his first buildings, manages minions and other resources. It's kind of like a real-time strategy game or a resource management game at that point. And additionally, the main character has the option to build a portal system where he can go in scenarios where they're like almost standalone adventures, where he can get loot, more XP, resources for his city building stuff. And it's a nice way to kind of separate the action scenes from the resource management stuff. And that's starting at chapter 8. I think that's where the story really gets good. But a lot of the beginning part is muddled and it's mixed, and a lot of it needs to be workshopped a little bit, at least to me at least. When you read the beginning of the story, you can tell the author is trying to figure out what kind of game world he wants to use. There is an introduction of like regular VR MMO mechanics, like the description, like, oh, he has a power bar he has to load up, and it's the straight action combat where he's throwing spells and costing mana and health bars and stuff. And then later on, there's also like hints that like an introduction to a sci-fi world that mixes in with this, like there's a cross-platform thing going on. And then later after that, after character creation, there's a single player tutorial with sci-fi elements of the NPCs being self-aware AIs. And then later on, there's an introduction to base building and resource management, and then later real-time strategy elements. And so there's a lot of things going on here. And I think in some ways that is a detriment, because it's harder for both the reader and the author to focus on any specific thing, because you have to keep bouncing back and forth between all these different things that you've already set up. And again, that's just a choice. It's just that real-time strategy games, resource strategy games, regular MMOs, single-player campaigns, they're all different kinds of games, and they each focus on different gaming elements. And so when you try to mix everything together, it just requires like a huge info dump for each type of game. And the story kind of loses focus, again, because you have to jump between each one of those things that you've already set up. Otherwise, it feels like it's a waste of time that you did it at all. This is also included in like some of the random story elements of the story, in that, for example, very early in the story, there's the revelation that the NPCs in the game are totally self-aware and that they know they're in a game, which is not a bad sci-fi thing going on. But a chapter later, the main character recruits NPCs that are totally dumb and unaware of the game, and in respect, like they just think it's a fantasy world, and that's an inconsistency. And then shortly later afterwards, again, more self-aware NPCs, and that's an issue with continuity. And then there's just like other random elements just like introduced to the story without being set up or really showing that there's any play later, at least for the first 70 chapters. For example, there's a thing called an end plague, which is supposed to be some digital to physical virus. I'm like, it's just mentioned and there's a little history, and then it kind of gets ignored for the remainder part of the story, which is, again, not very long at this point. But again, it's also not set up. And again, this story has good potential. It's just that it's trying to be too many things right now. It's there's so many different types of game elements. It feels like it's trying to do that, and then an action story, and an AI story, and a sci-fi medical plague story. I'm like, that's a lot of stuff to try to push into one story. Like, I'd rather see the author focus on the things that are good, that really work, and they feel new and fresh. And it's just the author figuring out what that is. I was personally entertained by the resource management aspects of the novel and the scenario system attached to it. I see that there's a lot of good story potential there because you can do the game stuff, build town building, resource management, building stuff, crafting, all the good stuff there, and then take breaks to do other kind of stories. Like, you could have your scenario system set up to go to a, an action story, or like a mystery story, or a whatever kind of story you want to do. And you can use those little stories to bring in new characters or resources. And that all ties back into like that larger, like resource management or real-time strategy story. And then that, and like so the author kind of has to decide what he likes about the story, what he's going to focus on, and kind of stick to that. Otherwise, things just kind of get cluttered. And that's just my opinion on it. This is not a bad story, but it's just not quite at a good score yet. And so for me right now, as is, the novel gets a score of 6 out of 10 for me. Again, that's The Hope Engine from the Royal Road. I'll have a link in the show notes if you want to go check it out. It gets a score of 6 out of 10. I know the author was kind of just looking for some press to get people's eyeballs on it. So go check it out. Go read it. Go give the author your opinion. And hopefully it'll help him to craft a better, fuller story that fulfills reader expectations, or helps to be a good story, a better story, I should say. So there you go. Okay, on to the last review of the show. Okay, this one is Fountellion in the Spiral, The Nature of the Game and Progression, Book 1. The author in the Amazon description calls it GameLit, but on the cover, as you can see right about here, the author also says it's LitRPG, and he's written me several times saying, oh no, this is totally LitRPG. And it is, in this particular version, which I'll get to in a second. Okay. This one is written again by, let's see, where's it go? A.D. McCoran Campbell. So maybe it's Addie McCoran Campbell. So there you go. That's the author. It is 236 pages. It is $1.75, which is kind of an odd number to drop on. I'm going to get a really nice price point. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. I'll read you the author's description. A gateway to a long-awaited VR MMO game world has opened for those who have a key. This includes Dan Harvester, a guy who lives in a rundown apartment with his cat and runs a gaming channel. He's almost through playing and testing VR games, but this is his one last chance to really level up. What can it promise him and its first beta pioneers? Fountellion is a nature world full of artificial life that mimics the laws of the source. Our own nature, with its force of evolution, it promises to be more than an adventure survival experience. For there are 6 insights scattered within the super fabric, and every player can find their own path to them. How much will Dan be changed? There's only one way to find out, and that's to tune in and to experience his Avalogs. For only by completing them together with fragments from its ambitious development can you two discover the vision that is the legacy of Fountellion. So there you go. That is the authorization read verbatim. And that kind of gives you a hint about what the story focuses on. Now, the brutal truth for this is that I don't like this novel. I don't. I first came across it about a year ago, and I found it impossible to read. Like, in its original form, when it was originally published, it felt like freeform poetry in its like formatting section. And it was just so hard to read. Like, I tried to get through it, because it talked, like in the description, it talked originally, when it was written like a year ago, it described itself as like there were game mechanics and a VR thing. I'm like, okay, maybe this is worth it. I didn't have anything else to read at that point, so I'm like, okay, I'll give it a try. And I just couldn't read, so I put it down. And it's not a big deal that's the case. That's just an experience. At the time, the novel didn't describe itself as LitRPG or anything like that. So it's like, okay, it just wasn't a fit. It's not LitRPG. It's fine. And I put it down. Later on, the author contacted me and said that he'd published that the version that I had read originally was an experimental version, and that he'd rewritten it and heavily modified it so that it was more like a LitRPG story, and he wanted to get a review. So like I said, I tried to reread it at that point, and essentially for the last 6 months, I've been picking it up and putting it down, trying to get through the theme, because it's still challenging to get through and read. But in this second or third version of whatever it is more understandable. So I was finally able to finish it. Although again, it's still difficult to read. There are RPG mechanics in the story. The first edition didn't have them at all. And it certainly wasn't LitRPG at that point. It is now. There are power descriptions and there are progression of those powers. Like those powers grow in power strength, I guess you can call it. But mostly a lot of the actual description of the main character and the powers are in line with like platform mechanics. For example, the main character gets a super jump ability and the ability to transform into other creatures. And the transformation aspects of the story are meant to be used to explore the different ways of existing. And it's rather clear in the story that those abilities, while they're part of the original story, have been kind of gamified in like the second or third edition. You can actually see in the text when you're reading it that it feels like they were inserted. Like there's like, okay, the regular story, and then stop. Here's a description of the game mechanics and like game logic terms. I'm like, and that's fine. If the video version, I'll actually pull up a screenshot of what I mean. You can see like all the stuff over here on the left hand side is like the explanation of those game mechanics, and here's the regular story on the right. And you can see like they're different text, they're different font sizes. Like you can definitely feel that, okay, these things were almost inserted into post, and that's fine. That's what revisions are for. That's, what new additions, like you want to change your story to make it more appealing to a particular crowd. That's cool. That's definitely a choice. But that's totally what this feels like for me. The story is, again, technically LitRPG. It has clearly defined game mechanics. There's progression according to the game mechanics of the character. But it absolutely feels heavily adapted to make it appealing to the LitRPG audience. And again, not bad. It's just that story feels like it. Like you can tell when you're reading this thing, it was not written specifically for the LitRPG audience. It feels like it was written as like this experimental concepts of like, how is virtuality going to change the way we view the world? What are the possible aspects of virtual reality immersion in experiencing different forms of existence? And that's fine. That's a thing. That's cool from that respect. But that original story, because I read it, is like, you can tell that there's been a shift. And that story was kind of taken from that really original format of like, this is the way we view the world, and into something a little more muted and like toned down from that respect, just to make it more appealing. And like, it is what it is. Go check it out. Go read a sample. You'll find out relatively quickly whether this is a story for you or not. For me, it just wasn't. It just didn't hit for me. And like I said, you could tell, I could tell at least, that it was just heavily adapted, and it didn't quite hit the mark for, at least for me, as a LitRPG story. There's no action in it whatsoever. It's mostly like exploration stuff, and like shifting into different bodies, like birds and fishes and things like that. I'm like, okay, that's cool. Just not for me. So for me, it gets a score 4 out of 10. Again, I didn't really like it at all. It would normally get like a 5 out of 10, but because I could tell that it was heavily adapted, that kind of annoyed me a little bit. I would have preferred like the originality of the original concept and trying to find that audience that really appreciated that, instead of like modifying it for a group of people you think, But anyways, that's me. So score 4 out of 10 for Fountellion in the Spiral, the nature of the game and progression 1. And again, the author totally knows this is not going to get a review. Yeah, I told him, or her, I can't remember the gender of the author, but I said, this is not going to be a good review. And they're like, yeah, it's fine. Any press is good press, so they know that this is not a good review. Okay, that's it, everybody. Show is finished. Those are all the reviews for the podcast this week. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Patreon. And of course, if you want to support the podcast in any way, shape, or form, you can find all the ways to do so at litrpgpodcast.com/support. Thanks again for hanging out with you folks. And until we can hang out again, remember to go read some LitRPG. Goodbye, everybody.